Kathy, it's all you. You have 20 minutes to share your recovery story, and thank you again very much for coming.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. My name is Kathy Kay, and I'm very grateful, recovering compulsive overeater, and so pleased and honored to be asked to share my story. I hope I have something that will be of help to some of you. In thinking about my history, I recognize that I've been a compulsive eater, a disordered eater as early as I can remember. I remember my grandmother from North Dakota visiting. I'm a Minnesotaite. I must have been in 2, 3, I don't know how old, but I was very willful and stubborn even back then. And I remember her asking me to eat something that I was not going to eat because, of course, it wasn't sweet. And sitting on the stairs until I decided to. I don't remember what the end of the story was, but way back then, I just couldn't get enough sugar in my life. And also for a really long time in my growing up, I always had a kind of a less than feeling. I had the less than the amount of sweets that I desired and less than the love support that I thought I needed. But I really did have it. In looking back on my growing up years, I needed to do amends to my mom because, my goodness, my willful stubbornness was really a challenge, I think, as I was growing up. For most of my adult life, and I'm now almost 72, I would purchase trigger foods in great quantities and tell myself it would last X amount of time. But of course it never did because it was quickly consumed in private. I was a terrible sneak eater as soon as I could secretly get at it. And another thing that I really remember from a lot of my adult years is that when October would roll around, and that's coming up soon, and there's that event at the end of the month where trick-or-treaters do a lot of stuff. And I would, when I had my own house or when I was an adult, buy Halloween treats when they were on sale, of course, early. And I think I'd have to buy that same Halloween amount of stuff maybe 2 or 3 or more times because I'd have eaten it all long before Halloween ever got there. My top weight was around 320 pounds, and I'm now about half of that. I've tried so many diets in my process that in the long run, I did a really good job of really wrecking my metabolism. My body just didn't know what in the world I was doing. Today, with program and exercise, that has changed, and my body now knows exactly that it's going to be getting healthy food and that it's not going to starve on one of those dumb diets. In the 1980s, in about the mid-1980s, I finally joined a small fellowship of Overeaters Anonymous in a rural community where I was living. And we gathered once a week to discuss the steps and support one another. However, back in the 80s, I don't think they had traditions. And back then, for some reason, I just never had a sponsor, which didn't help me develop the accountability that I now have, sending my 10th step to my sponsor every day. Or it didn't develop in me the self-respect that I now have in being accountable and following through on what I plan for my food and my action every day. My food plan I do the night before because that's when I have the most time. And I plot out exactly what all 3 of my meals are going to be, and then I just stick to it. And it's so easy to do that. At first I thought, oh gosh, if I plan something and I don't want to eat that, then what? But it's so easy for me to plan it out ahead of time reasonably and then not have to make any decisions during the day. I don't have to say, well, should I eat this or could I eat that? No, I know exactly what I'm going to be eating. And my action plan also includes don't eat in front of the television, don't take the whole bag to wherever you're sitting, take out a portion and put the rest way away. There are a lot of things that are triggers for me in my behavior as well as in foods that I really am alert for and pay attention to. In the discussion of the 12 steps in that small group, I don't think ever really did work steps 4 through 12, the meat at the heart of the issue, which helps uncover and get rid of all of that garbage that I carried around of shame and guilt for so many years. And I didn't either make any amends. So, of course, I still carried all of that around. The tools, I don't believe, were a part of OA back then either. And the tools are one thing that really helped me every single day, between reaching out, between reading literature, writing, journaling. I was not a journaler when I joined OA back in 2016, but I think I'm on my 9th or 10th journal by now because it's so easy to write my thoughts and get strength from higher power by connecting through journaling. So essentially back in the 1980s, I was a member of OA in name, but definitely not always in practice. Back then, I did what a lot of people do when they first join OA. I came to diets. I came to lose weight. And I did. I got down to a small size and then made a life change and moved up to northern Minnesota. And there were no Overeaters Anonymous groups that were easy for me to get to. So I thought, well, you know what? I've got this. I don't need to go to OA meetings. I don't need to practice the program. And all of you who heard those two comments are going, yep, we know exactly what happened. And sure enough, I gained every one of those pounds that I'd lost back and more. I did such stupid things when I got to this place where I'm living now. I used to, because of course I still had lots of compulsions, I used to get on the bike and bike to a convenience store or somewhere and purchase all kinds of my trigger foods and ride around town eating it. And for a sneak eater who thought she was eating secretly, that just shows you how crazy the disease of our diet can, our disease of our compulsive eating can be, because darned if there were probably people in all those houses I was riding by watching me day after day after day or often ride around and eat all this junk. And I didn't think anyone was noticing. My compulsive behaviors really reared their ugly heads because I would eat in the car while I was driving to work. Once I got to a place where I was a principal of a school and I commuted back and forth, I had about a half-hour drive, and that was a very long time to do a lot of really bad eating. And now today, I no longer think of food as a treat. There are no treats of food that will nourish my body, because if I call it a treat, then I'm eating more than what my body healthily needs. There are so many other ways that I can treat myself today. I can sit down and read a book I've been wanting to read. I can go out for a really nice walk. I can do all kinds of very nice things for myself without stuffing food in my mouth. I knew that I needed help shortly after I got into my ministry as a principal of a school, because I was up to over 200, almost 300 or more pounds. And at that time, I had a lot of thoughts from growing up that I needed to take care of too. So I was seeing a therapist for a short time, and it was her wise counsel that got me started back in Overeaters Anonymous. Since rejoining Overeaters Anonymous in January of 2016, I now work at being honest with myself and with those around me. I don't do any more sneak eating. When I'm completely honest with myself and my behavior, then I can be honest with other people. So the honesty starts with me. I have really, really worked all the 12 steps 3 times now, I think. And I've sent my 10th step inventory to my sponsor every single day. The more times I work the steps, the more I learn about myself and how to better work my program. I connect with my higher power, whom I call God, every single day. And if I don't do that right away in the morning, the day doesn't go quite so smoothly. I read OA literature every day. I love the For Today, the Voices of Recovery daily readers. I love the abstinence book. I just started reading, and I'm really enjoying this too, Beyond Our Wildest Dreams, the story of the creation of OA, which began by Roseanne back in 1961, 62, by going to a GA meeting, a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, and finding support. And it's a fascinating story. It's really good. She's the one that wrote that gorgeous, I put my hand in yours and together we could do what we could never do alone, that wonderful OA promise. That's Roseanne's. I am able to be the friend that others, be the friend to others that I have always wanted for myself, because I'm no longer isolating to eat. The more times that I use my higher power's strength to help me say no to food or food thoughts, the stronger I get. It's amazing. And I get my higher power's help sometimes by just saying a mantra that I have, or sometimes I have memorized the 3rd step prayer, and that's a wonderful way when a food is in my head to say, it's not my will, Lord, it's your will. Help me with this. And by the time I get to that end of that prayer, which is just long enough, usually the food thought's gone. The self-esteem that I'd really, really damaged by all that compulsive eating and by listening to the comments that many of you know you get when you're over 300 pounds, is recovering along with my health, because I finally feel really good in my own skin. And I finally have learned to really like myself. I no longer feel less than, because I now have more than enough of what I need to be physically, spiritually, and emotionally healed. By working my 10th step every day, I no longer go to sleep with any regrets or remorse. It's easier to get to sleep that way, because if there's something that comes up in the day, and I'm not a perfect person, I can still do things that need amends. When I recognize that, I make the amends right away so that I don't have to carry it around with me anymore. No more stuffing all of that stuff in a trunk in my insides and shutting it away and not dealing with it. Food, as I mentioned before, is not a treat for me anymore. I find it amusing that for so long I lied about how heavy I was on my driver's license. I don't know if any of you have done that, but I never reported what my exact weight was. It was always 50 or more pounds less than, and I don't know if, I did get stopped for speeding once or twice and thankfully didn't get a ticket. But you wonder how come the officer would look at that and say, I wonder if this is the right person, because the weight wasn't right. And I found it really amusing about a year ago when I released all those pounds. I don't want them back. I didn't lose them. I don't want to find them. I've released them. When I released all of those pounds and I got to my healthy body weight, darned if my driver's license still was inaccurate. But this time, it said I weighed a whole bunch more than I really did. So I was really pleased to get to my renewal about a year ago and finally be honest on my driver's license. Personal integrity has become very important to me. The saying, the truth shall set you free, is so true. Being truthful with all I live with about my compulsions and the foods that I need to avoid is really helpful. Most of them really accept my polite no thank you and don't usually keep asking or prodding. There are one or two that still sometimes say, well, couldn't you have just a little bit? And my response, especially when she's asking about my prime number one trigger food, I don't know if you mentioned them, but chocolate. When she's asking me about, oh, just have a little bit of whatever this is, I say, okay, if I was an alcoholic, would you go to the alcoholic and say, well, couldn't you have just a real small drink? That doesn't work. And it doesn't work any better for me. And so I think finally she's starting to get the message. I know that with my higher power's help and really working my program every day, I'm not powerless over the food choices that I make, but I always will be powerless over my trigger foods that are the cause of my compulsive food and actions. And it's those triggers, my behavior triggers and my food triggers, that need to be in the forefront every morning when I get up and ask my higher power for strength to avoid. I am becoming less socially inept too. I was a wallflower for a lot of my growing up in my adult years. I would stand in the corner, and of course, one of my first thoughts if I'd go to a party was, where's the food? And I'd be eating. I have so much more confidence in myself now. If you would have told me 4 or 5 years ago that I would be speaking to a whole bunch of people that I don't know and sharing all of this inside personal stuff, oh boy, I would not have done that way back then. But it's comfortable now because I'm confident in my own skin now. I no longer bury my feelings in false cheerfulness. I was a real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I would put on this face of cheerfulness and nothing is ever wrong, but inside I was dying and moody and impatient. Thank you. I now politely say no to any requests of my time when I'm not able to meet the request, because I know that if I say yes, then if I can't meet that, I'm going to feel bad. And if I do say yes and I take away that time from something else that I needed to do, then I'm going to have a resentment. And resentments are my worst problem. If I start building a resentment, pretty soon I want to head to food, and I don't want to head there anymore. So what do I do to distract myself when I have food thoughts? I attend an OA meeting, and if possible, if that's not possible, I listen to an OA podcast. There are lots of them on the OA.org website, and if you Google intergroups, you often find a good list of podcasts that you can listen to. And the way to get to the intergroups is to go onto the OA.org website and look for the regions and find out what the names of the intergroups and their regions are. And also on YouTube, if you Google Overeaters Anonymous, you get a lot of really good, including some of Rick's taped stories, are a lot of really good things that can spark your recovery that day. You have to be careful on YouTube, though, because I've run into one or two that are not from Overeaters Anonymous fellowship members, and they're not exactly what you want to listen to. Another way that I distract myself is I drink a nice big pot of water or flavorful tea. And I find that most often if I think I'm hungry, I'm really just thirsty. And by drinking all that water or lemon juice with a little sweetener in it and water, if I drink a lot, then that food thought goes away. I get the help of my higher power by what I suggested in saying the third step prayer, or I go to OA literature because I have a lot of it that I can turn to. And I especially remember how yucky my body felt when I wasn't abstinent. When I first connected with my current sponsor, she had me write down on a piece of paper what my worst bottom was. And anytime I thought I wanted to eat, I'd pull out that story and I'd read it and I'd go, oh yeah, I remember that. I do not ever want to go back there. And it would often forestall the food thought. And also I tell on myself. My sponsor encouraged me to do that too. The first time a food thought comes, I say, oh, thank you for sharing. I'm not going to follow up on that. And if the food thought persists, then I say, you keep that up and I'm going to tell on you. And if it comes back the third time I do that, I pick up the phone and I reach out and I tell somebody, you wouldn't believe what crazy thought is going through my head that I am not going to follow through on. And that often stops it too. So I think that I'll quit there. I don't know. I must be getting very close to the end. Thank you all. And if you have any questions, I've got a few minutes that I'd be more than happy to answer. Thank you all for listening and for allowing me to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. We're going to stop the recording.